And what they're trying to create is quite simple. It's a big tent system where creed, political affiliation matters not at all. It is Western civilization loving human beings who want to protect what was fought and earned over hundreds of years. And the second point they're trying to instill is that we all know what we believe in here. We all know that we've seen through this since the beginning. We know what's happening. We've diagnosed it already. The time to convert belief into action is now. It sounds like a cliche, but belief without action is indistinguishable from disbelief. So, now this is how appropriate of a panel is it tonight? We have the Honorable Brian Peckford with us tonight. As well as is one of the coolest doctors you'll ever meet, a freedom-fighting, no BS taking, Roger Hodkinson. Cool older guys give me hope about growing older. I'm not that young anymore myself, so I'm on transition to being a cool older guy. Now, the Western world is the most derided civilization on the planet. Have you heard anybody deride the former Barbary Coast nations of Northern Africa for the evils that they've done in their lifetime? No. The freest, the number one immigration destination on earth for people of color is the Western world. Yet it is the most derided civilization on earth today. There's something curious going on. Now, we all know this is an educated crowd. So I don't have to give you guys a history lesson. I will keep it brief. But something happened in the West hundreds of years ago, and it slowly grew over time that has never happened anywhere else in history. For throughout all of history, you had the pharaohs, the Caesars, the conquerors, the dictators, the monarchs, the kings, the queens. There was a king system, rex in Latin. And when the king woke up any given day, he could open his mouth, and whatever he said became law. Became lex, law in Latin. Rex made lex throughout all of history. Then beginning with the Magna Carta in 1215, leading into British common law, and then eventually Samuel Rutherford's Lex Rex opening statement, we began to create a civilization where we are all shoulder to shoulder under our natural rights. There is no system, group of people, or individuals that can disconnect us from our natural rights. And we let that flow, and we created the most successful civilization in human history. The first ever actual middle class. We unleashed the prosperity engine of the average Joe and Jane. And we created a world that everyone on earth, even today, wants to move to. And the most simple example I can give anybody about the difference between the West and the rest of history is if you look at natural order systems. You look at the leafcutter ant colony, for example. This is something that looks nonchalant, but it's an intricate system. Its civilization works like a machine. Below the surface, there's a 15-foot cavern with fungal farm sacks the size of footballs and refuse bags the size of sleeping bags. Which ant understands how that system works? Not a single one. Imagine if there's the worker ants, there's the egg-laying ants, there's the soldier ants. Is there a political ant? Is there a social engineer and central planning ant? No, that only exists in that evil only exists in humanity. Central planning, with all the good intentions in the world, tries to build a heaven on earth, but without exception has always only resulted in hell on earth. Now, we cracked the code of the scientific revolution in the 1200s. Then we cracked chemistry in 1600s. We cracked the code of nature. One thing we realize is the natural laws of civilization are free markets, freedom of private property, and freedom of expression. Those three simple rules, if followed, unleash the freedom and the beauty of a civilization, and we are living proof of that. Now, our first speaker tonight is going to later on run the panel of speakers. And she's going to come up and be our first established speaker. I want to welcome to the stage Faytine Graseshki. And she's a seasoned voice in the Canadian political scene. For 25 years, Fétine has been fighting for Canadians' charter rights at the federal level. She's also been active fighting against sex trafficking and other human rights violations. Education, counseling, reporting, and activism have been her tools. You can catch her latest adventures on her media site, Fétine.tv, F-A-Y-T-E-N-E.tv. She's spoken before parliamentary committees. She's been recognized by Charisma Magazine as being in the top 21 influencers worldwide and received the ANCJ Emerging Leadership Award in Jerusalem. Please give a warm welcome to our this evening's co-host and first speaker, Fétine Gricevsky.
Hey, hey, hey. Oh, wow. Wow. Well, this is just amazing. I consider this such an honor tonight, honestly. It's like, just get the dullest pencils out of the way first. That's kind of what I feel, like not including the previous speaker. But, you know, I'm a mom. I love this nation. I've led prayer movements. I've led teams of young people to address our government leaders over the years. And I don't have a bunch of numbers or letters after my name. I just love Canada, and I just want to get it done. Anybody else? Just want to get it done? And so I'm really excited to sit at the feet of just the amazing speakers that we have lined up for tonight. But Jonathan asked me, he said, hey, Fétine, would you share for about 10 minutes? You're doing this national tour. I'm going all across the nation right now, sharing a national transformation presentation, answering the question, how did we get the leaders that we currently have in Canada? Anybody ask that question lately? Like, how did we get here? You know, I loved drama, but I never thought I'd have a drama teacher as my prime minister. Like, how did we get here? You know, and I actually did love drama. So, you know, and so I started to do some research, and I've been involved in civic engagement in different aspects over the last 2 decades, a lot of different ways. But I never saw what I put together in this presentation until about this past March. And I rattled off some of the statistics at the Ledge today about how, he agrees, about how 0.2% of Canadians, I didn't know this, that 0.2% of Canadians actually determined who the current Prime Minister in Canada is. Should we deal with that? I don't know. Does it matter? I'm not sure. It sounds like a big walkie-talkie. It sounds like Daniel Bulford is trying to get here. I don't know. You know, I was stunned when I saw that number, that what only 80,000 people did in 2013 weighed up against 38 million people, which equates only 0.2% of Canadians, that set Justin Trudeau on his trajectory to be the Prime Minister of Canada for 3 parliaments in a row. Like, that literally riveted me, literally shocked me. And I was like, who are these people? Like, who are these 0.2%ers? Like, obviously they figured something out that I didn't figure out yet. And so I put together this presentation. I've been traveling all across the nation, and I'm gonna share with you just a small portion of it, but at the end of this, at the end of my 10 minutes here, this is my mom. Mom, give everybody a wave. And she's a freedom fighter. I come by it honestly. We have some flyers here. We're going to actually pass them down the line. So if you want to see this entire presentation online, you can catch the whole thing. But what I'm going to do here, actually, Chad in the back, can you jump ahead to slide number 6, 2021? I want to talk about the current construct of Parliament today. You know, in the fall or in the summer of 2020, my husband and I moved to New Brunswick because we were tired of being patrolled by police when we took our children to play in a park. Literally, we had a park across our house, our little bungalow. My husband would go there. People would call the cops because my husband was in a park by himself with his kids. It was crazy. And so we moved to New Brunswick before New Brunswick went crazy. Okay, we moved to New Brunswick, and when I moved to New Brunswick, 2 weeks later, the Conservative Party of Canada opened up the nominations nationwide. And I am not a blind partisan Kool-Aid drinker. Like I am not conservative forever, but I will take every opportunity to advance my views and values. And I knew enough about the political construct of our parliament by that point that I knew that the power center of Parliament going forward was going to hang in the balance of who won in the swing ridings. We knew that from what happened in 2019. And so there was a swing riding right next to me in St. John Rothsay. There was one guy that was being groomed to be the next guy in line. He was the golden boy of the EDA, the former mayor, and I pretty much disagreed with him on everything but carbon tax, like everything, you know? And so I thought if you can't vote for him, you might as well run against him. So I did. I put my name forward. The EDA freaked out. They shut the race. They knew they couldn't disqualify me because I was too high profile at that point. So they shortened the race, and by the end of the actual election, I lost by 86 votes. Pause for groan. Okay, pause for groan. Okay, but what that taught me was that legit, every single person matters. Every single person matters. Obviously, every vote matters, but also that there are these PowerPoints that if you can just hit the Achilles heel of the political process, you can actually take major ground, but you have to be in the right place at the right time. Because what I learned from my campaign manager was that if I would have just had 2 more weeks in that campaign, or if I would have had just 2 more warm bodies locking and loading with me, I probably would have won. Now let's go to 2021 because I want to accent this point. Right now in the Parliament of Canada, we recently had a marriage, right? You guys remember that moment? We had a wedding in the Parliament of Canada. First off, this is the construct of the results of the 2020 federal election. The Liberals took home 160, the NDP 25, the Greens 2, the Bloc 32, and the Conservatives 19. Conservatives and Bloc, I call this the freedom vote in Parliament. Why? Because when Candice Bergen tabled the motion to end the mandates, give us a date, give us a plan, these blue guys, the blue crew, voted for that, and the rest of the parties banded together to vote against it. Now that 187 on the left-hand side meant that this was made possible about 6 weeks ago. These 2 men tied the political knot and said that they're going to prop Justin Trudeau up, probably right until 2025. What does that mean, possibly? Well, possibly, unless Brian Peckford has a really good idea that I haven't thought of yet, which I'm sure he has many. I know he has many. This probably means that we are going to experience the same types of federal policies, that we've experienced for the last few years, only without the checks and balances of a minority government. So because I had my antennas up asking, or my focus on the swing ridings, I asked the question, what would it have taken to actually shift these 20 ridings so that the freedom vote would have won in the House of Commons in February? Well, I'm not a mathematician, but I know this much. Shifting those 20 ridings would have meant that we would have had 171 votes to push that motion forward and 167 on the left-hand side, and Justin Trudeau would not have a functional Liberal majority right up until 2025. And so what I did is I cracked open just the research on this and looked at the 20 closest ridings in that 2021 federal election. One of the races was won by only 12 votes. The biggest margin was only 2,000 votes. A few of these are within a ferry ride or driving distance from here. All the votes together, only 21,900 votes. So when a political commentator gets up on Power and Politics and says, "This is what Canadians voted for," I say, spirit of stupid be gone. Not really. This is what 21,900 Canadians who basically use their political influence in 20 swing ridings actually determined for all of Canadians. So I asked the question, first of all, what was that number? 21,900 Canadians. What percentage of the national population is that? Found out that that is a very tiny number, only 0.05% of Canadians that took a strategic democratic action at an important time in our national history, who got engaged through voting, determined that Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh could tie the knot. So I asked the question, what would it have taken to shift these 20 ridings? I think that's a good question. Well, because I lost by 86 votes, who was counting, I was, I knew that one person volunteering once a week for 3 hours over the duration of a campaign, an average of 6 weeks, is expected to identify 50 supportive voters. Doing the division on that, that means practically and mathematically that if just 438 freedom fighters would have showed up in these swing ridings and just served for 3 hours a week over 6 weeks, we probably would have been able to run interference on this political marriage and possibly had a crumbling of the Justin Trudeau Liberals, triggering an election a little bit sooner than 2025. Now, I'm not going to belabor these points because I rattled off a bunch of them today at the Ledge, and we've got so much more to cover tonight. But just to say this, over and over, as I just broke down the math, just studied it out, I saw that the battle for our nation has not been, over the last decade, it has not been in the hands of millions. It's not even been in the hands of thousands. It's actually been normally in the hands of a few hundred, or in some cases even a few dozen people that simply refused to withdraw their democratic authority, got involved through voting, through volunteering in swing ridings, and also, I want to be so bold as to emphasize this again as I close, making sure that we use the incredible opportunity that we have to vote in leadership races. I was so proud of Roman Baber today, who got up and just shared his heart, weren't you? I was so proud of him. I was so proud of Dr. Leslyn Lewis when she lost a shadow cabinet position because she was bold enough to put out a tweet that was an inconvenience to Erin O'Toole over a parent's right, or what she felt should be a parent's right to decide their children's medical future. You know, I'm proud of those that are standing up, but I believe it's wise if we really care about our nation, which I know each one of us does, that we show up in these moments where a few people buying a membership, voting in a political party leadership election race like we're in right now with the Conservative Party, volunteering in swing ridings, if we just continue to show up with intelligence at the pressure points and at the battlefronts of our nation, which are most often these swing ridings, I actually believe it's easier to shift our nation than we might think. You know, once again, I'll close with these words. One of my mentors, David Maines, said this to me standing in front of the Peace Tower: "The nation goes to those who show up to the vote." So thanks for your love for Canada. Let's continue to vote for great leaders so that we can see great outcomes. That's all I got to say in my 10 minutes, Jonathan. But you can go watch my presentation. Woo.
You left me my notes, right?
Oh, is that your note?
Yes, those are mine. Yes. Thank
Too
you.
many things to carry.
There we go. I think, yes. Well, let me coin the term here and now: Fatine the firecracker. How about that? Our next speaker is the co-founder and board of director and chair for the Taking Back Our Freedoms organization, whose chairman is none other than Brian Peckford. You can visit them at tbof.ca. Now, George Bears, who's a bear of a man, as you will see in just a few seconds, is the former national director of the Victims of Violence. This was an advocacy group for people who had lost loved ones to violent crimes and was started after the serial murders of Clifford Olson were discovered. George has placed pressure on law enforcement commissioners that has resulted directly in letting investigations be refreshed and have led to successful resolutions of what may have become unsolved crimes. He is a fierce advocate for the rights of those Canadians who have been victimized. A little-known fact, perhaps, is that he was once a songwriter and an aspiring country music singer. Maybe he'll sing for us tonight. Please welcome our next speaker, Mr. George Bears.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Thank you so much, Emmanuel, and remind me never to go rolling with you with your jiu-jitsu, but my sons may take you on sometime. Thank you. I knew Emmanuel, and thank you, Emmanuel, for that kind introduction. You introduced me as the chair, founder and chair of Taking Back Our Freedoms, which is wonderful introduction. However, I'm not the chair. I am the president of Taking Back Our Freedoms and the co-founder of this organization. And it was a great honor to start this journey over the last 8 months. Back in 1991, I left Victims of Violence after 5 years of working, I used to say some people take French immersion. I took homicide immersion for 5 years because back in 1985, I was out with a friend of mine who was a police officer back east. I grew up in Prince Edward Island. And what was going to be an otherwise uneventful night turned out to be a search for a young girl by the name of Sharon Taylor from Augusta, Maine, who was out photographing birds in a park, and she was an avid photographer. Instead of finding her with a sprained ankle or calling from a friend's place, we found her stabbed 18 times by a guy out in a day pass. She'd been dead for 8 hours. I've spoken to her mom almost every March 23rd, including this year, since 1985. I spoke to Christine this year. And it's something that could never leave me. I wrote some songs about crimes against children in '86, expecting to go to Nashville and do some work with Vince Gill back in those days. But I ended up coming to Alberta to work with the Rosenfelds, whose son was the third of 11 kids raped and murdered by Clifford Olson. I volunteered with them for a couple of weeks and stayed for 5 years. And from 1989 to 1991, most of the time I was in Ottawa, just down across from the Ark Hotel, Slater and O'Connor. And I had the privilege of spearheading Canada's first and only ever National Unsolved Homicide Project. And I was really an advocate for good, well, they were all good, the police investigators and the victims' families. Some of the RCMP brass and police chiefs and police commissions didn't like me very much. But the cops on the beat, we got along just fine. And I'm not the chair of Taking Back Our Freedoms, but what an honor it's been working the last 6 months with Canada's Premier, Brian Peckford. He's our chair. I've come to love this man. We've had many, many conversations. This was the first day I had the privilege of giving the man a hug. And Brian and Carol are two of the finest citizens in this entire country. And I will always refer to this man as Premier Brian Peckford. He's my friend. He's an amazing freedom fighter. I just want to give a short perspective tonight. My wife doesn't even know I'm going to say this, but 8 days after my beautiful wife was born on October 19th, 1964, her dad passed away a few months ago, and because of our travel restrictions, we can't even get home 2 weeks from now to Ohio to Coach Don Sutherland's memorial service, because they won't let us across the border because we're the dirty unvaxxed. 8 days after my beautiful wife was born, what did you say today, Julie? Don Sutherland had 3 big things happen to him. He caught his biggest deer with antlers in 1964. He won his second Grey Cup playing with the Ottawa Rough Riders, I guess. And, no, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, I'm sorry. And Julie was born. 8 days later, then Governor Ronald Reagan gave a memorial speech. And his theme then is the same theme we have to think about tonight. On October 27th, 1964, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Constitution have not let us down. We as Canadians have chosen to let us down. We've put it into the hands of lawyers who have no idea what the original intent was. And they're too arrogant to speak to Canada's Premier, who understands the original intent, in fact is the only living First Minister in this country who was there when it was ratified in April 17th, 1982 in Charlottetown. It was actually ratified a few months later. It was ratified in April 17th and it was signed in Charlottetown a few months later. You'd think if they were going to speak to the original intent, maybe it would make common sense to speak to someone who knew the original intent. And I've had the privilege of introducing my friend, Premier Peckford, many times and many Zooms over the last few months. And that's how I always used to introduce him. Well, there's more to it than that. He's not only the only living First Minister to bring that document forward. There's something much deeper to understand. As I've come to know, as I've gotten to know my friend, Canada's Premier, Brian Peckford. It was a 17-month journey. When in September of 1981, there was one province with one premier who stood up against another Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, in early September. And that man stood for his province, stood for his country, and his name was Brian Peckford. And he stood alone initially. So let's be clear when we leave here tonight. He's not only the only living First Minister to sign it. In September of 1981, he was the First Minister to stand against Pierre Trudeau. And yes, we need to hear from you. Please. Thank you. And that's why when we leave here tonight, and we leave here this weekend, that's why this is like October 27th, 1964, with the future President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. We have a Ronald Reagan in Canada, and he sits over here. His name is Brian Peckford, Premier Brian Peckford, and here's why. We can choose to go the way of a statesman, a courageous leader, who's not only the First Minister to sign that Charter of Rights and Constitution, but he's also the only premier in this country today who's standing up for us. So here's the choice. We can choose to leave this weekend as a time of choosing to stand with Premier Peckford and freedom, or we can choose to do nothing and stand with Justin Trudeau and the other 10 premiers and 3 First Ministers, and that takes us guaranteed to tyranny. We're already living it because we can't even go home to my beautiful wife's father's funeral. This is a time of choosing. May I give you a couple of options on the time of choosing of what we need to think about. Here's what that man gave us. If you look in the opening statement of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Pierre Trudeau would never have wanted this to be there. But we can thank Premier Peckford for this. This is what we need to think about in this precious document. Whereas, this is the law of the land today, by the way. Whereas Canada is founded upon the supremacy of God and the rule of law. When Premier Peckford stood up against Pierre Trudeau in early September 1981, within a couple of days, I'm so glad that you became friends with my friend, Premier Angus MacLean. We went to a little Presbyterian church in Caledonia, and the other side of Caledonia was Lewis. And on this side, the better side, of course, was Brooklyn. We'd meet in Caledonia. He'd sit across. Premier Peckford became friends with another statesman, a Second World War hero, Premier Angus MacLean from Prince Edward Island. And he joined Premier Peckford. But Premier Peckford led that fight. Soon, a couple of days, Premier Peter Lougheed from Alberta said, "Hey, Brian, I'll get Romano and the other boys here in the West. Brian and Premier Peckford and Angus MacLean sort of covered the East, including René Lévesque. And they became the Gang of Eight, and Ontario and New Brunswick opted out and stood with Trudeau. The end of September 1981, through this man's leadership, we won a victory in the Supreme Court of Canada, and the impasse was over, and we were on to negotiations again. And that's why, in this time of choosing, we have this precious Charter of Rights, where it's not the supremacy of God on the other side of the choosing. It's the supremacy of Justin Trudeau and all the premiers, and we know where that takes us. Or we can stand up and fight. In my family, just like your family, we all have those who stand against us. I give a warm invitation to all the vaxxed. Many of them have been coerced. A few of them didn't make it. And she said I could share her name anywhere. In this time of choosing, think of Cheryl Moberly from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. My hero friend down here, Dr. Hodgkinson, has been through the reports of her daughter's death. On October 12th, 2021, in this time of choosing, her 39-year-old daughter, single mother of 4, made a choice that she wanted to continue to provide for her 4 children. She wasn't given informed consent, which would have been lawful. She was forced because the government of Canada and the cowardly premiers would not stand up for informed consent and do no harm. Quite the opposite. They said, if you want to work, you must be jabbed. So she became jabbed because she wanted to provide for her family. I used to think, when I'd hear about Auschwitz in Germany, how could that happen down the road when all of this is, all these Germans, and I'm not picking on Germans, I'm not picking on anybody, but how could that happen when just down the road they'd be singing, "Nearer My God to Thee" in the local churches? Until October 17th came along, and I realized, my God, we're doing the same thing. Because in this time of choosing, we're choosing tyranny over what Premier Peckford gave us, the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And these unlawful mandates, I'll leave you with this thought. And this is where the flashback came when I had to get re-engaged again. I left Victims of Violence on June 30th, 1991, because on May 14th, I took a call one night from Charlottetown. I had street kids working in my office and senior citizens and university students. They're wanting to come in from all over the country. We used to say, let's make homicide research fun. And the culture around this place is a combination between MASH and Barney Miller and Hogan's Heroes. Because we had to have fun, because the world was upside down and we had to have fun. We had to treat what Warren Allman called my street kids. I called the Solicitor General of Ontario one time. I said, give us your toughest 17-year-olds. Why 17? Because 16, they'd fall under the child, they were not ready for the big house. The 18s went to the big house. Maybe we could capture the 17-year-olds. And they come into my office and they would say, what the F do you want? And I said, listen, I'm not Willie Nelson, but neither are you. You're going to sit down, you're going to shut up, and here's the 3 rules. There's no smoking, there's no cursing, there's no drugs, and you treat those seniors and those university students with respect, and every Friday you got to get 80% or better or you get strike 2. We never had a strike 3 because that was an exit interview. We had 92% of those kids, when they're done with the community service time, some of the toughest kids in Ontario, volunteered with us afterwards. That's good stuff. And I said to Warren Allman one day, my dregs of society, just so you know, they're writing to you now. And they're demanding that you change the thing. They don't need a roof over their head. They just need to be shown respect. Here's the thing. On May 14th, 1991, I picked up the phone one night. It was from Charlottetown, and my brother's girlfriend was murdered. When I asked her name, I said, wow, who's the next of kin? And they said, John Beers, my brother's girlfriend. So I left. When I spoke to Cheryl Moberly last fall, 30 years came back and the Lord said, you need to go and set these justice things straight again, never knowing I'd get to meet this wonderful man. Anyway, Cheryl's daughter, on the 17th of October, Cheryl was basically broke her way into the hospital to intensive care. And she looked in the intensive care room and she said, why does my daughter Jolene have a mask on? And the doctor said, I don't even need to talk to you. You're not vaxxed. You don't have a mask on. You're not even supposed to be here. She said, I'm asking you a question. He said, if you must know, we have a no mask mandate in Saskatchewan, and your daughter kept putting her mask on. So we took towels and tied her wrists to the bed rails, and she hasn't had her mask off for 3 hours. There's a few choice words that Cheryl gave that guy, and he said, I'll call the police. And she said, please do. And she went, and she said, I haven't heard my daughter call me mommy since she was 9. And I gently took the mask off her face and untied her wrists, and 2 hours and 14 minutes later, she died. We need to hold these people accountable for the tyranny. And in closing, ladies and gentlemen, here's the good news. I've never met so many courageous Canadians in my life, from all walks of life. So when this October 27th, 1964 challenge that Ronald Reagan gave in the greatest nation in the world, really, we love Canada as well. Julie and I are both countries, and I love Canada. We have a time of choosing for Canada's Premier, who gave us, whereas Canada is founded upon the supremacy of God and the rule of law, or whereas Canada is founded upon tyranny, and no, you can't go to your dad's memorial service 2 weeks from now, Joel, because we're coming into a country of tyranny, and this is a time of choosing. So I'd ask you to do three things tonight. First, get on your knees and pray to God that He'll help us through this mess. And while you're on your knees, will you thank God for Premier Brian and Carol Peckford? They are heroes. These people are heroes their whole life. And number 3, will you call your friends and your family and say, you know what? This is a time of choosing. Please choose freedom. Thank you, and God bless.
Boy, I thought I had pep and passion. Man, I need a vial of your sweat before you leave tonight, George. I'm going to take a shot of it before my next workout. A little housekeeping before we roll along. We have a timekeeper here. Could you please stand up for a second? It's okay. And she'll give you the 2 and 1 minute warning. After that, I come on stage, double leg takedown, you're done. So, except for the ladies. I will not tackle the ladies. Our next speaker is Tanya Gaw. Now, she is the founder of Action for Canada, and you can find her work at actionforcanada4.com. In the wake of her successful and influential political mobilizing efforts, an expert at organizing and forming large-scale letter campaigns involving tens of thousands of Canadians, she has fought against bills C-16, the transgender hate speech and bathroom bill, C-45, the marijuana legislation, C-75, the soft on crime legislation, as well as Motion 103, the attempt to create a prohibition, essentially, on the criticism of Islam. Tanya knows how to turn the disgruntlement of common-sense Canadians into real tidal waves that are heard not just behind closed doors at family get-togethers, but in the halls of power. Please welcome our fellow freedom fighter, Tanya Gaw.
Thank you so much. Okay, so don't start me yet. I got to turn my, this was supposed to be turned on, but we couldn't do it in advance. Okay. Okay, is that coming up? Oh, we're good. It's a miracle. All right, super. All right, so yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to Jonathan and everybody, your team that's put this on tonight. And so I'm going to get right into it. You know, a lot of what we're talking about is horrible and tyranny, and what do we do about it? And Action for Canada was created to bring solutions. We don't want to just educate people and scare the bejeebers out of them. We want to be able to equip them and empower them personally to take action, and that's what we're doing through Action for Canada. So for those of you who aren't, I just wanted to bring up our website, but I'm going to get right to what it is, what I'm here to talk about tonight. Wow, okay, that's a good start. That's even better. Okay, is there a reason that I've just lost that? Okay, this is good. We'll stick with that. All right, so in our journey, I was called, I feel by the Lord 7 years ago to do this. I've never been political. I had no idea. I was so green, but I dug my feet in and I started to get involved because I was concerned about the future for my kids. And so I started the letter writing campaigns, and that led to ultimately forming Action for Canada. And so I started creating resources. I was at this way before COVID, and I said COVID is just a symptom of something that was coming long before that. And many people that I worked with, incredible leaders of organizations across Canada, were fighting real hard, but Canadians weren't ready to listen. They were still comfortable. They could still get to work, even though they were, you know, the noose was tightening with taxes. They could take their kids to programs and bring them to school, but they weren't paying attention to what was being taught in the school. They weren't paying attention to the decisions the government was making. And so we were fighting hard to bring attention, and it was really hard to do. So I thought, okay, so I started building Action for Canada. I started building resources with the intent that one day we would have chapters across Canada. And this is where we're at right now. Everywhere you see a flag. So I'm pretty excited about this. We're even now up into the territories, and we're going to just keep building. We had to actually put a pause on it in the last couple of months because we were growing so fast. And I said, we don't want quantity, we want quality. And for people that aren't having an answer back from a chapter leader, these are people like you and I who have just said, you know what, I'm going to step up and I'm going to help. And so we've got our resource page for our chapter leaders. It covers absolutely everything they need to know. We've got provincial chapter leaders. So now the plan was that we have campaigns, which I'll cover more of those tomorrow, a bit of detail, but we have a campaign. We first started with reaching out to church leaders, trying to help them keep their churches open, which led to an incredible business campaign where we've been boots on the ground, going into businesses and telling them, you don't have to close, these are your rights. That led to a parent campaign and so on. And so by the time last August, Ron had joined our team, and he's incredible with people. I said, would you put everything on hold and help me to start vetting chapter leaders? And so Ron dug into that. And what we look for in a chapter leader is that they understand that the foundation of this nation is the exact reason why they had freedoms and what we need to fight for. Okay? Some people get offended when I talk about the fact that Canada is founded on Judeo-Christian principles, biblical principles, very good principles. And all I ask is that you don't have to be a Christian to be, absolutely you don't have to be a Christian to join Action for Canada or live in Canada. That's the beauty of it. But do you understand that gift you've been given? So now it's no longer time to think about us as a multicultural nation or a secular nation. We're a Christian nation, and we better start embracing that. Because when you look at the 57 Muslim majority countries, there's amazing people living there under tyranny. When you think about China, what do you think about? Do you think about freedom in that country? Okay, how about Pakistan or North Korea? Compare a Judeo-Christian system of governance and belief to any other nation, and man, you better be proud and patriotic to be living in this nation. Okay, so with that in mind, once we started getting the chapters going, we have a great system. We're recruiting parents to run the parent teams, and we're recruiting people to reach out to businesses and then our employees. With the notices of liability and other resources, we are literally saving lives and jobs. And yeah, thank you. We've got many, many testimonies of people, but for those at the federal level who are having a tougher time, we're equipping them. Wow, 1 minute already, right? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll talk more about that tomorrow. 5 minutes is not enough for all we're doing. It's just really not. And so what we're doing within the chapters as well is we are recruiting elected officials. And we have a mayor and city council in Maple Ridge. I've met with the mayor, 4 city councils on our side. We're going to support them. We're going to get them all elected again, and we're going to try to replace the 3. We've had 2 trustees replaced up north. All right, our teams got involved. Okay, this is really good stuff. We're creating a database, and the database countrywide will have every single district for school board trustees, for mayors, city councils, MLAs, MPPs, everything, okay? So it may take us a couple of months to get her done. And so in the meantime, we're telling our chapter leaders, you know what, this is grassroots. Right now you get the name of anybody that wants to run for office, and we're gonna get behind them with all we've got. But in order to do this, we need to bring up our numbers in all of our chapters. We need people supporting us and joining our chapters, because 200 people in a small town can take back a school board to all the school board trustees. Right? Couple of thousand people in a city can take back all of the city councilors and mayors. We can do this. There is power in numbers, and Action for Canada is talking about the powers in numbers, and we're just motivating people across Canada to get involved. They're excited when they see this kind of activity going on. Anyways, thank you so much. God bless you. A marathon. I'll give you that. I'm just going to put my computer.
Amen to everything I just heard, right, ladies and gentlemen? My goodness. It is a who's who tonight. I feel like I don't belong up here. My gosh. Thank you. That's my dad. No, I'm just kidding. I don't even know this guy. That's right. Almost. Thank you. All right, rolling on. Dr. Charles Lugosi. Now, I hope I didn't butcher that. The man you're about to hear from next has led cases in the Supreme Court of Canada, presented briefs to the U.S. Supreme Court, and has been practicing lawyer for just short of 40 years. A top-tier student in high school and university, he was a Dean's List graduate of the University of Western Ontario and the youngest in his law class. He practiced in Ontario and British Columbia in fields ranging from criminal law, medical malpractice, and labor law. He added a theology degree to his prestigious resume, as well as upgrading to Doctor of Juridical Science at the Ivy League level University of Pennsylvania in the U.S. We are looking forward to his insights this evening. Please help me pass the baton to Dr. Lugosi.
Today, I will discuss with you the rule of law and its origins in the common law. I will define for you the meaning of the rule of law and its imitator, rule by law, also known as legalism. I will discuss how the emergence of positive law derived from legalism replaced natural law, which is the guardian of the rule of law, and opened the door to the replacement of the authentic rule of law with rule by laws that is disguised in the name of the rule of law. And I say this because judges don't get it. How do we know when society is governed by the authentic rule of law and not its pretender? A brief history of the common law, focusing on the features of the authentic rule of law as seen through the eyes of legal scholars and jurists, teaches us the truth. History reveals over time how the moral foundation of law was rejected and replaced by immoral political objectives, implemented by political parties and some of their many appointed judges. The source of the common law is found in religion and submission to the supremacy of God. In the case of Western societies, law was given by God to the Jewish people in the content of the Ten Commandments. The law of God established the laws of Jewish society, and this law later became the foundation of Western Christian civilization. The basic principles of the law set out in the Ten Commandments serve as a constitution between God and God's people. The law is religious and moral in origin. Civil law cannot be separated from the law. Morality cannot be divorced from the law. The law reveals, establishes, and declares what is moral, just, and right, applying equally to all people in society, for no one is above the law. The law discriminates between what is moral and immoral, right from wrong, good from bad, and truth from lies. Any transgression of the law is an offense against God. The law demands unqualified obedience in all circumstances. The law is an absolute, unchanging moral order to which people must conform. It is not negotiable. As a whole, the law has coherent integrity and consistency. Education in the law is mandatory to ensure compliance with the law. Application of the law to specific cases developed over time a body of case law common to all, the common law. Civil society exercises power to enforce the law. The use of fair, proportionate force protects the law and society from anarchy and lawlessness. The common law was founded upon and infused with Judeo-Christian morality inherent in the law. The history of the common law and its development suggests that the conception of justice inherited by Canada and the United States of America from England is a Judeo-Christian teaching of love. For example, in a famous case called Donahue and Stevenson, a British judge called Lord Acton took the Christian commandment to love your neighbor as yourself as a legal duty, extending a duty of care to one's neighbor. To be negligent and cause harm to your neighbor merited damages in a products liability case. From the source of the law, the common law of negligence was discovered, formulated, and applied as a principle of justice. Principles of justice are thus discoverable by judges in the common law and are derived from the Judeo-Christian commandment of love. The Judeo-Christian religion have always stressed the importance of absolute truth. God's word is truth, and law is truth. To establish truth and justice in a country, there must be rule of law founded upon a religious and moral foundation. Lord Alfred Denning, considered by many to be the greatest English jurist in the past century, observed, "Religion concerns the spirit in man, whereby he is able to recognize what is truth and what is justice, whereas law is only the application, however imperfectly, of truth and justice in our everyday affairs. If religion perishes in the land, truth and justice will also." In his letter from the Birmingham jail, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. There are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what's the difference between the two? How does one determine when a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with moral law or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. St. Thomas Aquinas distinguished between just and unjust laws that either conform to the natural law or are a corruption of law. Human law is law insomuch as it is in conformity with right reason and thus derived from eternal law. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas believed that if law is at variance with natural law, it is not law but spoiled law. Lord Denning, the longest-serving judge of the English court, said, "Without religion there can be no morality, and without morality there can be no law." Now we can understand what the rule of law is. I define the rule of law as life in a society governed by inherently just moral laws sourced from the law given by God, where the people are submissive and obedient to the supremacy of God. Life under the rule of law means to live in a free and democratic society that honors God's commands, absolute standards of right and wrong, characterized by willful obedience to truth, justice, and righteousness. Constitutional limits are placed on the power of government to permanently protect the freedoms of conscience, religion, and morality from infringement. Authentic rule of law ensures equality, for no one individual or faction is above the law. All human beings at all stages of life, from conception to natural death, have equal absolute rights to life, liberty, and security of the person. The laws of the government are not restricted for all laws, whether executive, legislative, or judicial. They are held accountable to moral and legal scrutiny for conformance to the authentic rule of law. Justice is the hallmark of the rule of law. What do we have? We have legalistic rule by law under the false label of the rule of law. I define rule by law as life in a society governed by legalism divorced from morality. It is the antithesis of the authentic rule of law. The source of rule by law in Western society today is a secular humanistic cluster of beliefs, including totalitarianism, identity politics, intolerance, idolatrous self-love that permeates the collective mind of the ruling class, expressed by big tech like Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Twitter, educators in universities, colleges, high schools, lawmakers, mainstream political parties, and paid-off media and woke corporations, all of which to various extent purge, cancel, and persecute dissenters with tools like hate speech laws, imprisonment, segregation, and financial harm. In this society, there are no absolute standards of right and wrong, but moral relativism, the permissible flourishing of individual freedom under the banner of human rights. This secular regime is empowered by positive law. Society is characterized by coerced, deferential obedience to legalism, falsely labeled as the rule of law. God is no longer the source of law. Morality is divorced from the law. Inequality pervades society. Legal fiction replaces truth, so people live by lies. God's laws that were once embedded in the common law and in jurisprudence have become relics, fossils, replaced by laws and judicial decisions derived solely from human philosophy and rational reasoning. Court decisions now legitimize immoral conduct once forbidden by the law. Common features to both kinds of regimes are laws and judicial opinions that are accessible, known, clear, certain, and of prospective, not retrospective, application. The main distinguishing difference between the two regimes is the presence or the absence of deference to the supremacy of God and the authentic rule of law. In our Charter of Rights, the law's source is God, and people seek the truth. But in the other, humanism prevails. People abandon God and the truth, and the words of the preamble to the Charter become just mere empty noise. Is that what we want? No. I contend that when there is a struggle between those who fight for the rule of law and those who fight for rule by law, there will arise issues that are so controversial that society becomes divided, leading to the disintegration of that nation. Today, the very existence of Canada is at stake. We have reached a point in time when the abandonment of the authentic rule of law creates a crisis that results in the rejection of historic moral values and imposed coerced obedience to the government. We are here today to restore national unity and to help you understand why the words in the preamble to the Charter of Rights, the rule of law, and the supremacy of God are foundational to our entire Constitution. For what you learn today is paramount to properly interpreting our entire Constitution. It is our responsibility in the next 40 years to ensure the restoration of the rule of law and the supremacy of God to their proper place in our laws.
Just keeps getting better. It's a real Hall of Justice superhero meeting tonight here, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? And the good news is Batman and Superman are still yet to come. Next up, Dr. Roger Hodkinson. Our next speaker has ruffled a few feathers during the COVID pandemic. A medical doctor who graduated from none other than Cambridge University, his specialty in the field of pathology. He is currently the chairman of the examination committee in pathology of the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. Not exactly working at 7-Eleven. You might have seen him as he stood, or an ex-snowboard instructor, I don't know. I throw it in there. You might have seen him as he stood with the trucker convoy in Ottawa earlier this year alongside Dr. Paul Alexander. He was an early objector to our government's lockdown mandates and first went viral, unexpectedly to himself, he told me, when he confronted a city council meeting in Edmonton to criticize Alberta's response to COVID. Also the former president of the Alberta Society of Laboratory Physicians. This next speaker has some fantastic insights on this modern struggle. Please welcome Dr. Hodkinson.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. Let's get down to it, shall we? I don't mince my words. I mean every single goddamn one of them. And for any snitches in the audience, come and get me. What an immense honor it is for me to be on this stage today with political giants, the likes of Premier Peckford, Preston Manning, and my good friend Mad Max, and others. And others fighting so courageously to regain our freedoms, the freedoms our fathers died for. Period. Repeat. The freedoms our fathers died for. That's on the table. So it's totally appropriate for me to commence my speech with the opening salvos of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for which Premier Peckford fought so valiantly 40 years ago. Quote, redundancy has effect. Listen carefully. Whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. That is what we're talking about today, and this man here is largely responsible for why we are here today. Thank you, Premier Peckford. What a thundering statement that is. But the Charter only has meaning if it's honored in the daily life of Canadians, not dismissed as an irritating inconvenience by our so-called leaders. I would like to use a medical analogy in this. Democracy is sadly in the ICU. She got there by neglect. No one noticed the incremental loss of freedoms over decades. That is, until an unlikely motley crew arose out of nowhere. I'm talking, of course, about the truckers and the Freedom Convoy. George, give me that thing on my chair, on the chair. Put it on the top here for me. My most precious possession, other than family photographs. This thing. So I say, thank God for the truckers. Thank God for the truckers. Thank God for the truckers. Yes! But we must also say, thank God for COVID. Not a callous statement. Every death is precious. But as government's draconian reaction, it finally gave us something to react to. And it took truckers to take on the state for all of us. They became the treatment for that uniquely Canadian disease, the terminal niceness syndrome, and temporarily prevented democracy's demise in the ICU. If you applaud less, I can speak longer. We've been taken advantage of by our political leaders by permitting the progressive intrusion of wokeism in all its guises and the evil dystopian aspirations of the World Economic Forum. You know, you'll own nothing and be happy. It's been nothing less than what I call the rape of our very soul. It's that grotesque. This tyranny of the minority by the newly minted elites must end, and must end now! I don't take prisoners, and nor should you. The realities of government, the reactions of government on COVID have had utterly catastrophic consequences, either physically, psychologically, or financially, affecting every single person on earth, and all so totally foreseeable and preventable. All the interventions failed, all of them. Breathing barriers, social distancing, testing, contact tracing, quarantines, travel bans, business closures, and so-called vaccines. I repeat, underlined in neon, they all failed. Every single goddamn one of them failed, and we told them it would fail, but they did it anyway. But not only that, they made a bad situation worse by forcing the emergence of scariants. I believe it will take the tragic deaths resulting from childhood vaccination to finally awaken the general population. Has it really come to this? Child sacrifice to appease the new gods? It didn't make the rain fall for the Aztecs, and it won't save Granny in the nursing home. That's how obscene this child sacrifice is. Words cannot describe how despicable that is, and I call the people responsible decomposing maggots. That awakening will, I believe, set a new stage, a new era in politics based upon core traditional values that you're all familiar with. Family, history, culture, religion, and above all else, a renewed trust, I hope, in our political leaders. Values that founded this country and are now being trampled on by Clydesdales with impunity. The Great Resetters have overplayed their hand, and it will now be replaced by what I call the Great Reject. Magna Carta II, the Great Reject. It's there for the taking. This massive opportunity to reclaim our freedoms will require the emergence, not yet seen, of the type of political leadership once embodied by Churchill. But do not wait for his reincarnation. And do not assume that winning the battle in Ottawa is the end of the war. We, the people, must get democracy out of the ICU for good. And free her from the shackles of wokeism to set a better future for our children. Yes, indeed, I believe this is a time of optimism about our future, but only if we act opportunistically and collectively in a variety of effective ways. First of all, get educated on the issues and donating to organizations such as Taking Back Our Freedoms, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom, and others. Then lobby vigorously. I'm talking vigorously. Stop being nice. Lobby your elected political leaders, whether municipally, provincially, or federally, for full accountability. This will be addressed, as suggested by Premier Peckford, by a national independent inquiry with testimony from truly independent experts, not sycophants from universities and the various ministries. No, true independence. Everyone responsible for this monstrous attack on humanity must be identified, tried, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This inquiry should also demand restraints on governance of publicly funded organizations and institutions to ensure that this madness never occurs again. And ensure full debate of any future restrictions of freedoms in the various legislatures. Lobbying means pound the table. and state emphatically, enough. Enough. Stop being nice. Scream enough. It's that serious. Enough. Shame your church leaders for hiding behind their pulpits exactly when you needed them. Get elected to school boards to change the curricula, and if not, consider homeschooling. Tell them to rein in universities, which I believe are the root cause of wokeism, representing a self-perpetuating elite of closet socialists. And you do that very simply. Day one, you turn off the spigot. The spigot of funding. And there'll be a howling and wailing like never before. But that will certainly get their attention. A new political order should also unilaterally change the governance of the colleges of physicians and surgeons across this once fine country and free physicians of their repressive intimidation. But more about that tomorrow. I'm even angrier then. But my comments would not be complete without alluding to your personal health problems. First of all, of course, do not submit to the clot shot or the so-called boosters. I repeat, do not submit. Yes, the consequences can be devastating. Devastating for family finances and career. However, you can pick up the pieces later, but you can't pick up the pieces if you're dead. And it has killed many people, and some of whom you will know. Get fit, lose weight, get your blood pressure under control, and diabetes. And so on for your personal involvement. So I'll conclude, almost, timekeeper, by sounding a few alarm bells that should ring loud and clear as a result of the COVID pandemic, and ways to stop the clangor. Firstly, gain of function. The high-stakes game of creating more dangerous viruses such as COVID-19 in the fatuous attempt to create better treatments. This must stop immediately everywhere. Because it represents a fatuous attempt to create better treatments. It cannot happen. It represents an existential threat to humanity far greater than nuclear war. It could kill us all. I'm speaking knowledgeably. I'm chairman of a biotech company doing DNA sequencing. I know that of which I speak. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to tell you that could kill us all. Let that sink in. It's got to stop. Secondly, China. If I may paraphrase, China! China! Yes, he realized early on that in the COVID pandemic, that 90% of our pharmaceuticals came from China. And in consequence, he encouraged the repatriation of offshore manufacturing in general. We must understand that the West is at undeclared war with China now. And making them stronger is like giving steel to Germany in 1933. There was a medieval concept of war that's been forgotten. You don't feed your enemy. You starve them to death. You used to put a siege around the castle. We should stop buying Chinese goods anywhere for anything and starve them into submission. Because they're coming for you. Make no mistake. The decay of the West and the ascendancy of China, they're coming for you. So, ladies and gentlemen, take heed. Do not get complacent about minor victories such as the dropping of, mask mandates, facial diapers, breathing barriers, whatever you want to call them. That's a minor victory. We must maintain the vigorous momentum started by the truckers and fight a holy crusade against wokeism wherever it rears its ugly head. A dystopian future of climate lockdowns, social credit score, and corporate ESG is avoidable, but only if we all act collectively now. Remember, democracy's Achilles heel is the exploitation of freedom without corresponding responsibility, individual responsibility. You can't have one without the other. So I urge you all to stand up peacefully and demand change. Act local, but think global. A new political era is here for the taking. So grasp it! Thank you.
Woo. I see a lot of singed eyebrows in the front row there. I'm going to have to rename him Roger the Fire Breather. I think he's got more testosterone than I do. And also, our resident legal expert, Dr. Lugosi, has offered his services for free should Dr. Hodkinson get a defamation suit after tonight's speech. But yes. Oh, it's all being filmed. So before I introduce our keynote speaker this evening, we're going to show a quick recap video of this man's career who needs no introduction. Please look at the screen.
Allow this nation on the northern part of North America to go down the drain because we have people who've gotten hungry for power and have discarded the individual freedoms that you and I own. They are ours. There's none two of us the same. That's why individual rights and freedoms are so important, right? Because it's you as a person, you as an individual, not you as a family, not you as a group, okay? Not you as part of some other organization, not you as part of the province. It's you as an individual Canadian. Possess these rights. That's what's important.
At this point, our next speaker hardly needs any introduction. For 10 strong years, he led Newfoundland and Labrador as their premier. He also had a stint as the Minister of Mines and Energy, helping free up the economic power engine of the offshore oil reserves for his maritime constituents. At just 36 years of age, he was the youngest Prime Minister in Newfoundland's history, and he did so without connections or elite upbringing. He had a true, regular, working-class background and rose to the top of the Canadian political system. Not averse to fighting prime ministers, Brian Peckford fought Pierre Trudeau's cabinet to try and keep Newfoundland's and Labrador's offshore oil reserves their own. You have probably heard that the creation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was birthed in a kitchen pantry in 1981 by 3 premiers. This is not true. The story is much more complex and nuanced than that, but Brian Peckford's version and formal ratified treaty of a charter was the first formally presented before the Kitchen Accord was ever even known about, and agreed upon by 9 out of the 10 premiers. He is the DNA of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Put your hands together for a man who's forever imprinted in our national DNA, for a national treasure, the Honorable Brian Peckford.
I was here in this place before. It was one of my, I guess my first journey down the island. And at the time, Jonathan and his friend Cam were after me to come down to speak to their group. And I said, well, we've made a sort of a rule that because we're starting to get some requests from my first speech in Port Alberni, at another church, by the way, that we really need to have 50 people to make it worthwhile. So if you could sort of guarantee me 50 people, you know, we'll journey down and put it in the agenda with the other rally that was going on at the legislature that I was to be part of. And so Carol and I pondered this because Cam had called me, and then Jonathan and Tamara and them got involved. And yeah, Brian, we can guarantee you 50 people, and they'll be at this place, which we hadn't heard of before, up to then. And so when we left the hotel and drove to find this place with our outdated GPS, because our car is 2008, and it didn't have one plugged into it. We found it, and we were here about 6:45 or 10 to 7, and we had to find a side street to park on. There was cars everywhere, and we were wondering what was going on. Was there another church or something nearby? And we came in, and we were told that rather than 50, or the last number we gave you, which was 150, it looks like we got over 400 here tonight. And there was something very magical about that night. I don't know if anybody here was here that night or not. Yeah, quite a few. It was magical. That was one of the most magical events that I've had happen to me in my lifetime. Because it was really funny, because there is a real hunger to understand what's going on in Canada, and it was so evident that evening that when I got up, where was I sitting? Right here somewhere, and I got up to come up to the stage, everybody stood up. And I couldn't even figure that one out. But it was just that they were so appreciative and grateful to have somebody who would explain to them the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the history of our Constitution. And I said to them, and like so many in the hall who are here now remember this, I said to them at the time, might take 40 minutes or more, 45 minutes. And, it's pretty dry stuff. But if you stay with me as we go through it, I think you'll understand it. You could hear a pin drop for 40 minutes. But I made them a promise. I made you a promise that night that as something came up that was really on your mind about it, and some question you had or something you learned online or something that you had read, don't worry, I'll stay here till every question is answered or every comment is given. That helped silence the crowd, hasn't it? But in any case, the silence was unbelievable, and I got through it all, and we did our question and answers. I went to Black Creek between Campbell River, Carol and I, and Courtney, many weeks later, as a result of being here, at another church. And a similar kind of situation. In that church, that was full. When Carol and I got there about, again, 10 to 7 or 10 or 5 to 7, there were people lined up outside. And they weren't going to be able to get in. And they saw us coming and shook my hand and shook Carol's hand and said, thank you for coming. We know we're not going to get in. And Carol said to a couple of the organizers, perhaps they could line up against the walls. Perhaps they can sit down on the floor. And they did. And they all got in. And what was incredible about that night was there so many young families, young mothers there with children. It was amazing. And then there were people there who were even older than me. Once again, this magical thing happened where I said, anybody got a question or whatever, I'll stay here until everybody's finished. Tomorrow morning, fine and dandy. I'll stay. So you'll get your chance to ask the question or make a comment. And they were lying down in front. There was a big area in front in this church. I don't know if they had a fountain there earlier or what, but there was a big area there. And they were sitting down there, lying down there. And there was a mother, a young mother. Was it 2 children or 3 children? 3. Like 9 and 6 and 4, something like that. And for 40 minutes or more, and the question and answer period, it went on for like 2.5 hours or something. And all of these children all over the church, and young mothers and fathers and stuff, asked their questions, and these kids never made a sound. And afterwards, when I got down, and this young mother and her 3 children, I said to them, I had to go along to them and say to them, because they were good representative of the other mothers and that I mightn't get a chance to say thank you to, I went along to them. And before I got a chance to say thank you, this young mother said, is there any chance of me getting a photograph with me and my family, and somebody would take the picture? And I said, absolutely, absolutely. So she said, I would really appreciate that, because she said, when I found out that you were going to come, I started teaching my 3 children about our country and about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that you were going to meet one of the people. And when I stood there, I used to be 6 feet. I'm about 5'11" now, on a good day when I stretch. The 8 or 9-year-old's head sort of came up almost to my armpit there. And then there was the next kid, and the next kid, and then the mother, and somebody taking a photograph. I looked down at this young man, and I said to him, thank you, young man. It was just fabulous to see you and your siblings here, and how behaved you were through all of this all night long. And I stopped. And he looked up at me and he said, no, Mr. Peckford, don't thank me. We want to thank you. Amazing experience of people really wanting to know. I think that's what I've learned over the last year, and especially in doing all of these speeches and stuff, both on Zoom and in person, is the desire on behalf of so many people, because they know they have missed something, right? And a lot of us missed something over the last 40 years or so as we didn't think we were allowing anything. We thought everything was going along okay. We just thought that for some reason. We became detached from all of the struggles and wars that had happened to get us where we were, all the sacrifices that were made to get us where we are today. And we had forgotten about it. We got very, very comfortable. We all did. I did. Everybody did. And then you could see this happening where people were wanting to know and understand more about the Constitution and to make it so that they could understand it. It didn't have to be mesmerizing legalese to understand some basic principles of living and how we should govern ourselves. And so I think that's what I found out most over the last while, was that one of the things I wanted to happen tonight, and all of the people who spoke I know very well, and many of them have interviewed me, Faitine and Tanya, and they're doing fabulous work. Fabulous work, all of these people are, was to have Mr. Lugosi, Dr. Lugosi. We never got into his credentials. This man is credentialed to the teeth. He lives here in the Victoria area now. And because he had sent me what he gave you this evening, and I went back to him in an email and I said, perfect. You give that good. We need to know, not just from me, not from me, but from a legal scholar, grounded in the law, practicing the law for decades, just how he came about understanding natural law and the rule of law, not the rule by law. And I was so happy that everybody let him finish the speech, because it had to be that long and it had to be full. It had to be full and complete. And that was very, very important, because we need to understand that too. We need to understand we're not only, as Dr. Hodgkins and Dr. Steve Pellich and Paul Alexander can all explain to us, that we can understand it. It doesn't take too much to us to understand the medical thing, right? And how that, the College of Physicians and Surgeons, what they did to Dr. Charles Hoff and so on, and doctors in Ontario and things. We can get a handle on that medical thing. It's easier, not easy, easier. But the legal part of it and the constitutional part is a bit more difficult, because we're not exposed to it the same. We're not going to the doctor's office every month or whatever, or getting an X-ray or whatever, and we're more familiar with that side. But the legal side and the constitutional side is one that is more remote from us in our lifetime. It should not have been, but it was. And so that was very important. I think all of the people who have spoken tonight give you a good picture of the situation. And then the question becomes, the great question becomes, what do we do now, right? How do we move on from here? And that's something that I guess we'll be debating over the next day or so. I hope out of it will come some way forward where I mentioned it today for you people who were there today, and those who weren't, I'll just mention it again. We never came by this, Carol and I, lightly. This is not something that we just got into. This is something that grew on us over time with Dr. Hoff, and taking a second look and saying, you mean to tell me this product, nobody's going to stand behind it, that all these people are creating it, can walk away if thousands of people die? And, what's that all about? You go and get a car, there's a warranty on it. What's all this about? So, those kinds of questions like you had, we all had those things, so it grew on us. I had to tell you, so significant reform has to happen. I mean, when we talk about changing the system, this is what I tried to make clear today in outlining those those principles, that Magna Carta of mine, is that significant reform has to occur. And in the same way that I left, the party, one of the traditional parties, 2 or 3 years ago, after being with them for 40, 50 years. I mean, I never came by that lightly either. But we learned during my political career, where I was offered stuff and go and lie on the beach, to being in situations with other politicians and so on, that I've learned. And I remember saying to my students, I was a teacher for 5 years, and when I left teaching and went into politics and they wanted me to come back and give a speech the next year or whatever, I represented a riding that had never been conservative in its history, 1832 to 1972. I was the first conservative person elected to that riding. But when I go back and talk to my students, who helped me get elected, by the way, who came out and campaigned for me, my high school students, they weren't old enough to vote, but they actually came out and campaigned anyway, my high school students. But what I said to them, even a year after, because I could sense what I was in, okay? You have to be honest. I had 3 things I said back in 1973, 74. And so I can say them here again tonight. Number 1, you got to be honest. And that's tough. That's real tough. I didn't think I was going to last on that score. I thought I was going to have to quit because I was being asked to do certain things, and I said no, by my own crowd, by my own party, by people in my own party. Be honest. Be yourself. Be who you are. I talked about individuals on that screen. That's what I'm talking about. You got to be you. To be honest, you got to be yourself. And as Dr. Hodgson would say, and I guess Charles would say, and everybody else, and Tanya and all the rest of them would say, be a little bit brazen. Be bold. You have to be bold. And that's what we have to remember. Forget political dogma. Forget political parties. We've got to try to get down to fundamentals, right? And understand. Because that's where I think all of us really are now. I have to mention that, and I mentioned churches already. I was raised in the United Church of Canada. My dad actually sang in the church. He actually played in the church. He actually spoke in the church. He was a great United Churchman when there was a United Church of Canada, when it was a church and not a social organization, when it was a church. He came out of the United Church of Canada was formed by the Methodists and Presbyterians and others. Some stayed with their own churches, others left, as some of you older people would know. But I remember in those days, right, those things of honesty and those fundamentals, and it was about God and it was about religion. And it's brought Carol and I full circle, because in all of except the legislature, and all of the places we have spoken on the island, except for a few in the Parksville area, small business people who have risked their businesses and having me speak at their places, they've been churches. They've been churches. And I say that because of the supremacy of God and because of what Charles said and others had said and George, my good friend, has talked about. But it was more than that. In Black Creek, it was this. And I realized it then. I realized it, and I happened to mention. And for many people who were not part of sort of fundamental Christian parishes or congregations, they mightn't understand it anymore, because all of the mainstream churches become like the mainstream political parties and like the mainstream media. You know, they've all become woke people. And I mentioned that Carol and I visited Turkey years ago, 2001, as a matter of fact. We were there during 7/11, which is another great story. But in any case, in Turkey, we took a bus and we went to Cappadocia in the central part of Turkey. And we were told about the early Christians who had to go physically underground because they were being persecuted. And it was only people in the more fundamentalist tradition who had been learning the Bible and learning about that, that when I mentioned that in Black Creek, it was almost applause in the sense that we understand because we've learned that in our churches. We learned that in our churches. And it's really strange, coming from two mainstream Christian denominations, Carol and I, and being exposed to seeing for the first time that there was still some fundamental reading of the Christian history that they understood immediately. I mean, it was immediate in the audience when I said Cappadocia and the early Christians and having to go underground. There was an immediate understanding of what I was talking about. And I didn't think it was going to be one thing. So I want to acknowledge, because we're here tonight in another one of these churches, that there is amongst some parts of our society in Canada a still realization that not only our Second and First World Wars or Korean Wars or the 100 Years' War or whatever, we have to go back, as Charles said, to the fundamentals of natural law, which comes out of the Judeo-Christian tradition and which comes out of other people who also sacrificed for our freedoms. Imagine how magical is that, right? Black Creek, Vancouver Island, talking about Cappadocia in Turkey, and early Christians and people understanding them. Fabulous, right? I mean, I never thought in my wildest dreams. So we've got to, going ahead from here then, somehow put together, and I don't know what will transpire over the next day or so, but we're going to have to put together, I don't know if it's a Citizens Congress or whatever you call it. All these organizations can remain and do the various works that the other organization's not doing. I don't mean that. I don't mean, because I'm a very heterogeneous, I was always against what Pierre Trudeau was trying to do, eliminate the provinces and have everything come out of Ottawa. I understand federalism and confederation very, very well. And I think it's very, very important. I think federations are really important, as are nation states. We can't allow ourselves to be subsumed by internationalism and we become nothing, right? And just in the paws of some international organization. We can't allow that to happen. And so we've got to work on this movement, if we want to call it that now, of us and people who are in all of these organizations doing this wonderful work, to come together so that we grow and become a threat and therefore have pressure against the establishment to force them to change, even to what I said today as this, first of all, having that national inquiry and getting these independent medical experts to come, and we're going to have to raise money to do that. A lot of money is going to have to be raised, and we should wait and do it properly, not rush it, do it in the right way, get all these organizations to participate in that, right, and do it the right way and bring to account those who have done wrong over the last couple of years. But then beyond that, we must put enough pressure on either bringing new political parties into the system or having the existing ones reformed so that we don't recognize them anymore because they're doing something right. We just can't allow political parties to go ahead and get elected and not tell us how they spent all the money that the members gave to them over the years. We just can't do that anymore. That's off the table. You just can't do that anymore. So we've got to force these. Yes, make all the promises and keep none of them. So we've got to somehow mobilize into practical terms what we're talking about tonight, what we talked about this afternoon, what we talk about tomorrow, so it becomes practical and meaningful, right? I love culture and I love history, as some of you know, and hearing me speak, I can go on all night about Socrates and Plato. I learned classics at university. I took up more history courses and English literature courses than I was supposed to take and all that stuff. And I had a little debating society in the common room of the Arts Building in Memorial University, where I would just start off and get people to participate, students, we'd miss class, in the common room to debate about the big issues of the day. That's how I started, right? My first year in university, that's what I was doing. By the time I got to my third, I had so many people in the common room that we'd have to stop it a few weeks so they'd get back to their classes. And so they all came to me then in my third year and said, "You got to run for student council." I did and got elected. And of course, that's the beginning, I guess, of my political career in one sense. But I did start the first student council in my high school before that. But so live in the world of ideas completely. I've got to translate that into something that's on the ground for people, right? And when it is, then it's meaningful, and then we can have a decent society, a democratic society, right, and a free society. Right? So let's work together over the next while to come together in as much as we have to come together to launch this national project so that we make the change necessary so that we're free again. Thank you very much.
What an evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I know bladders are a certain size and consistency. If you can, let our speakers hit the washrooms first, because we're going to have them come right back to the panel. We don't want to be done at 12:30 p.m., although anybody here will have something better to do on the weekend than save Western civilization. So there's food downstairs, there's bathrooms breaks for everybody. Please come back in 5 minutes and let these guys go in and out so that we can be done within reasonable time. Thank you, and see you in 5 minutes.
Okay, so I'm not going to reintroduce our incredible panelists that have already been reintroduced. We've got Dr. Charles Lugosi, the Honorable Brian Peckford's already been introduced and is a hero to us all.
You guys can hear me now or not so
George
much?
Bears, oh, there we go. That's Eric coming in virtually. So I'm just going to read off the bios of the new contributors to the stage right now. Dr. Anna Kindy. Why don't you give Kindy, I'm so sorry. Like I said from the platform today, my name has been butchered my whole life. I was once introduced Fatin Krakow. It was horrible. Okay, so Dr. Anna is a general practitioner that has served the North Island population for over 20 years. Give it up for her. Specializing in addiction medicine, she has networked and coordinated with multidisciplinary groups involving mental health professionals, hospital administrators, as well as community leaders to innovate patient care in a very vulnerable, at-risk demographic most people have given up on. Wow, thank you, Dr. Anna. That's amazing. Yeah, the world needs more Dr. Anna. Interestingly, she is very humble about the fact that one of her hobbies is mogul skiing. Impressive. And what exactly, these are the notes here, what exactly would you call someone on the Canadian Olympic team who participated in the 1992 Winter Olympics freestyle event in France? Is this true? What? Please welcome the island's own Dr. Anna Kindy. There we go. Amazing. Thank you for your grace. Jeremy Maddock. Jeremy Maddock is a freelance legal consultant based in Victoria. Victoria boy. He graduated from UVic Law School in 2016 and provides research and writing support to lawyers throughout BC, often in cases involving the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Thank you, sir. Mr. Maddock challenged BC's vaccine card program on his own behalf in the BC Supreme Court. He argued that discrimination based on vaccination status infringes the Charter rights to medical autonomy in an arbitrary manner, and that Canadians must be free to weigh the risks and benefits of vaccination for themselves. The case was heard by Chief Justice Hinkson. Did I say that right? Hinkson? On May 12, 2022, and a decision is expected sometime this summer. Thank you for taking up the fight, sir. That is amazing. So many amazing Canadian heroes. I'm just impressed. Dr. Eric Payne, is he up there? There he is. That is a big Dr. Eric Payne. Dr. Eric Payne is a pediatric neurologist and clinical researcher. He obtained a Master's of Public Health from Harvard University and is a board-certified in pediatric neurology. So thank you so much for joining us by Zoom, Doctor. We appreciate your contribution tonight. So the title of this panel, and I've been asked to reduce it to 30 minutes. Initially, we were going to give it a full hour, but we definitely don't want to wear you out tonight. And so we'll give it 30 minutes so that we can get some time to mix and mingle before we need to wheelbarrow a few of us out to our beds after all of this. But the topic of the panel is how to increase public participation in political parties in Canada. And I so appreciated with what the Honourable Brian Peckford, what you just said in your remarks about either completely rebuilding a new political option or building a new political option or reforming the current political structure so that it's unrecognizable. I think either one of those options could be amazing. One will probably be quicker than the other. So why don't we dive into this right out of the gates? What my first question, and what I'd like to do is just go right down the line. We'll start with the Honourable Brian Peckford, and ask the question, if you could only give one piece of advice in response to this question, how do we increase public participation in political parties? What would your number one piece of advice to the freedom movement be right now?
Perhaps I, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, perhaps I would say that perhaps the question is poorly framed, because we're assuming the political parties, we should participate in them. Well, right now, I really can't participate in any of them because they're all corrupt. So, and I mean, that's just not a catchphrase on my part. So, as I said in my closing remarks, we need to reform the system because they're all not playing honest ball with us. So if I had to give a really quick answer without just saying that, it would be that if in 6 months we don't see any of these established parties really becoming honest, publicizing their financial contributions and how they spend it, a full audited financial statement by all of them, then we have to either tell them that they got to get lost and we're going to form new political parties, or support those parties that do produce all of their financial statements and got policies that we agree with. We can't stay with them anymore. The system has to be changed. People have died. People have been injured, both by the measures and the vaccines. And so it has to be changed. And so to suggest that the existing system that's caused all of this death and destruction can change to a measurable degree so that we can support them is an open question in my mind.
Thank you, Mr. Peckford. Dr. Anna, how would you respond to that? How can we increase public participation in this?
First tell you that my heart's going at about 100 a minute right now, or 120. I'm not used to talking. But I'm going to use the word grassroots, and I heard Dr. Stephen Malthouse, who's there somewhere in the audience today, and he mentioned that word grassroot. And I think trying to elect somebody as a prime minister or even as a premier and expecting change, it's not going to happen. There's a deep state out there, it's not going to happen. So what I'm seeing today is grassroots movements. For example, all the two ladies up here talking about Canada for Canada, Change for Canada, United. All these grassroots movements is how you institute change. And what happens with grassroots movements is you get numbers. And so we've got numbers tonight. And with numbers, that's how you get political change. And I think your talk about, you don't need those huge numbers. So again, I think grassroots. So we got to get involved in the sense of what we're doing today.
Thank you so much. Well put. Jeremy, Dr. Jeremy.
I would say the first prescription I would have is a diversity of opinion, both between parties and between members of parties. The thing that really concerns me about the pandemic response is something that's concerned me about parties for a while now. They all seem to say much the same thing as one another. Like on the size of government, for example, conservatives occasionally grumble about the size of government, but whenever they're in power, they seem to increase the size of government. So there needs to be a real option, there needs to be real choice. If people feel that all the parties are doing the same thing and saying the same thing, people are less likely to vote, they're more likely to be cynical and not engaged. So yeah, more diversity between parties and more diversity within parties, which practically speaking means less party discipline. It means the prime minister or the leader of the opposition shouldn't be telling individual members how to vote. The individual members should be responsive to their constituents.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Yes, sorry.
Testing. Thank you. A couple of things. Remember, a time for choosing tyranny or the rule of law, supremacy of God. In that time for choosing, we need to decide what we're looking for at the local. What did General Flynn say recently? Act locally, influence nationally. At the most local level, municipal, county, provincial, federal. Understand what you and your family stand for, your 2, 3, 5 key points. Get involved early in the nomination process. Find your tribe in that nomination. Work hard to get someone who stands by your principles nominated at the local level and hold them to their commitment. And remember this, and I learned this so much from Premier Peckford. Today, we're at the worst participation of citizen involvement in the Western world, somewhere plus or minus 1%. We need to move that citizen participation, it'd be wonderful to get it to double digits, but even when we can move that participation to 3%, 4%, we govern again. That means everybody here start influencing 3 to 5 people and we'll begin to govern again. Set your values, get involved locally, and hold them to account. And thank you.
Wow. Could I dig into that a little bit with you, George? Like, so you said find your tribe, start early. Okay, yes. Can you expound on that? Because I've found, and I don't mean any disrespect in this to our own movement, but I do think I love what the Honorable Brian Peckford said about honesty. As I've been doing this national tour across the nation, passion level is 12 out of 10. Knowledge level of the governmental process is like 2 out of 10. Most people don't know that they can vote to determine who's on the ballot. Most people don't know that you have to have a membership to vote. So when you talk about getting involved early on, could you unpack that for 60 seconds for us, or maybe 120?
Sure, very briefly. When you mentioned running in New Brunswick, I can relate because I come from Prince Edward Island. And The problem what I find in the citizenry is we don't know what we want and we think government runs it. We are the government. So getting involved early is, again, getting involved locally at the school board level, the police commission level, the municipal level, provincial, federally. Getting involved early is begin to understand what you're looking for and stand by your principles. Find your tribe and work at that the earliest nomination process, and make sure then you hold who you nominate accountable.
Yeah.
We can change the country when we do that, county by county by county.
Yeah. And do you have an estimation on what the average nomination at the local level is won or lost by in terms of votes, if you had to take a guess?
You really summarized it best tonight when you were with less than 100 votes.
Easy.
I remembered so many campaigns I've been involved in at the local level. Brian, you'd certainly know this better than I, but oftentimes it's within 20 votes when you're at that most local level. Wouldn't you agree, Brian?
Yeah. Under 100. How many people in this room? Somebody do a quick count? More than that. Okay, there we go. Okay. Dr. Charles, how would you answer this question? How to increase public participation in the political process?
There was once a carpenter called Jesus, and he stated in the course of a discussion about alcohol that you can't put new wine into an old wineskin. Our traditional established political parties, the Conservatives, the Liberals, the NDP, they've been bad for a vigorous and healthy parliament. We need new people, new ideas, and a new party. My idea is to get involvement, is to take all the activist groups, such as what we have gathered here today, form a new umbrella political party of independent candidates who are free to act and vote according to their conscience, who share the common values of belief in the supremacy of God and the rule of law. That's my point. And let me add to that. How do we sift through the candidates who aspire for this political office? We need to look at their actual conduct, not their words. We have to assess the content of their character, not the color of whatever they are. We have to find people who are statesmen of moral integrity. I have a checklist. Is truth and justice integral to this candidate? Does this candidate oppose segregation? Does every human being matter, whether rich or poor? Are the lives of all innocent human beings protected in any condition, from conception until natural death? Does the candidate ensure we live in authentic, free and democratic society governed by the rule of law? Is every individual and every institution held accountable for their acts and omissions? Does the candidate guard the planet Earth from destruction and abuse? Does the candidate do everything possible to care for all vulnerable human beings? The poor, the oppressed, the sick, the orphan, the old, the lonely. Is the candidate free from corruption, favoritism, influence from lobbyists, or sources of money that may affect or influence decisions and the enactment of laws? Is the candidate humble, compassionate, kind, have a servant heart, exhibit wisdom in both personal and public life? This is not an exhaustive list, but these are my first thoughts. But we need objective standards and political involvement to filter out unfit candidates, because otherwise we'll continue to be ruled by people who, by positions of power, leaving out in obscurity the best candidates who don't have financial means or political network skills to hold any kind of public office. And so all our candidates in this new party need to have a clear stand on all issues, however controversial. We don't want them to say like Trudeau and say, trust me, give me this law and then you'll see what the regulations will say. No, we want to know what they promise and they deliver on the promise. General platitudes don't impress. They reveal only shallowness, and that's insulting to all of us because we think for ourselves. So I conclude by saying, elect people with moral integrity, people like you, free of party loyalties, people like you. And in this umbrella party, there's no whip to tell you how to vote. You take each and every issue, decide what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is evil. Vote according to your conscience. That's how we get people involved, because otherwise, good people will look at the list of who's up for election and don't even vote.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. Dr. Eric, up on the screen, how would you answer that question? How to increase public participation in political parties? What would your top tip be?
Good evening. Can you guys hear me okay?
We sure can.
You can? That's great. Well, thanks for having me. I'm sorry I can't be in Victoria with you. You know, I come at this from the medical side, of course, and I think, you know, this is speaking to myself about 8 months ago, we need to slap people out of their apathy. You got to come to the realization that they are using medical tyranny to bring in global tyranny, and you either are for that or not. And people don't realize that we're in a war is the problem. And these people are extremely well funded, they're well organized, they're extremely smart. But the biggest problem is that they control the message, they control the media, and they control what people are hearing. And so, you know, the messaging, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said in terms of grassroots and getting, you know, proper candidates and all that stuff. And I've seen firsthand in Alberta, you know, what happened with a whole bunch of people bought UCP memberships to try to vote Kenny out. I mean, these things matter. But I think right now, you know, we are still living under the medical tyranny with respect to the COVID, these vaccines. And there is an incredible opportunity to show just how egregious this has become. I mean, you just have to look at provincially available data to see that you're most likely to get COVID if you're triple vaxxed. How are we still forcing children and people to get onto planes with this vaccine? People need to see that and get angry about it, and to realize that this is just the first step. I mean, the World Health Organization this week was voting on whether or not they should usurp our national sovereignty with respect to pandemic response, right? How many Canadians even know that was going on, right? So all of this grassroots stuff totally matters, but if we can't get that message out and really rally people around what's going on right now, I think a lot of it's lost.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. Check. So the Honourable Brian Peckford would like to respond to this, and then I'm going to summarize what we've heard and throw another question at you. Go ahead.
What the last speaker has said, because he's moving towards, it's hard for people to understand this, and for me, it's only after 50 years, right, or 48 years, 2 years ago, whatever. And I highlight, besides these international, Premier Ford is likely to get re-elected in Ontario. I mean, it's one thing to get rid of Kennedy, and the people who are running still in that party is still not a clean party. So, I mean, you know, it's got to be taken farther than that, right? Because the leadership is only changing the label on the bottle. It's not changing what's in the bottle. And until we change what's in the bottle, the substance of the party, both in policy and in honesty, nothing gets changed. And I just highlight again what the doctor just said again about, you know, from the medical point of view and how much money is being spent by international organizations and by our own government, and going to Davos and going to the World Health Organization and supporting these measures which are going to take away our sovereignty. And what's happening in Canada about that? Except for organizations like we're involved in who are opposing it, the majority seems they'll go along with it. So I also point out to you two other things that's really important to know about this when you start looking at political parties and stuff. And this comes as no surprise to you, but is never mentioned all that much. Polling and the polling firms and lobbying, okay? I have to tell you, I just said to the doctor here before we started, and I told a couple of people today the story. When I got out of politics, Carol and I formed our own company to help businesses in their interaction with government and other organizations, anybody for that matter. And I was contacted by a lot of national and international, I want to tell this story, it's very important, international lobbying organizations.
You're Brian Peckford, you're allowed.
But it's what I say and not who I am right now, okay? What I say. I really want you to understand what I'm saying. And so I went up and I was sort of not interviewed by this national lobbying, international lobbying firm. I was hired like automatically kind of thing. So the first thing they wanted me to do was to go with them, and I had a couple of days, to go with them, with the vice president and me, to this huge big company that they were lobbying for, getting paid unbelievable amount of money every year just to lobby the federal government, okay? And I sat in this meeting. Now I'm talking about 1989, May, June of 1989, I guess it would be, Carol, after we had our own company formed and we had our office set up. And I called her, it was before computers, and I think I might have faxed her too. At the time fax was the big thing then. And I had quit. And that one lobbying firm would pay me enough for 10 other clients, right, for work I was doing. But I had to turn it down because I couldn't get out of that meeting quick enough with the client because it was all dishonest. They were all setting up the situation. It was dishonest. Okay? So I have to tell you, that's what's happening now in all the provincial capitals. Okay? One of the first things I was told, people who whisper in your ear, you gotta watch them and listen to what they're saying. I wasn't in office 24 hours when a person got in touch with me, and they knew they could get in touch with me, and contacted me, wouldn't do it on the phone. And I met them and they said to me, beware of Lavalin, which is now SNC Lavalin.
Wow.
That was in 1979.
Wow.
Number one. Number two, don't ever interfere. I was told by my clerk of executive council, who was a really honest guy, don't ever interfere with the Department of Justice.
Wow.
Okay. That was the two messages I was given. So I have to tell you, I ran a by-election once. This is forgiveness time. I ran a by-election once. I was progressive conservative. This was in the Liberal riding. It was called Bellevue District, west of St. John's. Of course, you can't go the other way. You're in the water. But in any case, it was on the isthmus of the Avalon, out near Clarenville, come by chance area. Anybody who knows Avalon Peninsula, and then you come off the isthmus and go over the rest of Newfoundland, that Bellevue area. There's a community there called Bellevue. I don't think in history, we might have won it once or twice over 100 years or something. Okay. And so people came to me and said, you know, we want to have a crack at this thing, right? And this is the way it works, right? The party, you say, we want to have a crack at this, Mr. Leader, or don't you? No, I said, you just let it play out. You know, our candidate get elected, let the association do. And then they came to me and they said, well, you know, it's possible we can win that. It's possible we can win that. There's been a lot of problems with the Liberal Party there and so on. I had just had my staff trained into polling, so we didn't have to hire a polling firm every time for a by-election and something like that. This is a true story. They were trained by some of the best pollsters in North America. Okay? Party paid to get them trained. We did a poll, and it showed that we were almost tied with the Liberals. So I got involved in the campaign. Okay, candidate got elected by the district association, and we start campaigning. During that less than 21 days, we polled, and we had it down that within, was it 4 days, 3 days, we had it down to less than 50 votes. Wow. And then we could identify what communities were most likely to come our way, and we knew what messages they wanted to hear, and we gave them those messages and we won the by-election.
Wow.
By the 25 votes my pollsters had told me 2 days before. So when people talk about being close to winning elections, as soon as that happens, the mainstream parties, with their pollsters, right, and sometimes lobbyists as well, re-engineer the situation so that that close call that you thought you would get elected the last time, and you can't reinvent the past, and it would have been true for the past, won't be true for the future. Because they'll re-engineer the situation differently, have the right messaging so that they're on side to win it again. Okay, that's the game you're into today, okay? It's highly sophisticated, highly financed, both on the lobbying side and on the polling side. And that's why what Charles says, rings so well. That's why you've got to change the whole system.
Okay. Wow. Wow. Okay, so I'm just going to recap what I've heard. Okay, so the question was, how do we motivate? How do we increase public engagement? I'm hearing you talk about making sure that we've got good candidates, that we vetted them, people of integrity, assuming that will motivate people to get off their butts and get out there. I heard George talk about how the slim margins, once again, if that doesn't motivate you, I had a friend actually that lost by 5 votes. Like, she was incredible. She would have been like a Jody Wilson-Raybould kind of type, and she lost by 5 votes. Sharing the stories, the power of the grassroots, that came up a few times. Finding your tribe locally, getting involved early. The importance, the Honorable Brian Peckford talked about the importance of changing the internal culture as well, not just the label on the bottle, or changing the entire system, burn it, like just start over. And I want to say again, the importance of strategy, intelligence. These are the things that I'm hearing, some of the themes. Now, I want to ask the elephant in the room question. Am I allowed to do that? And that is the biggest problem it feels like we have in Canada right now in terms of reforming the political landscape federally is this one tiny word called time. And traditionally, for a party to start from the ground, like the PPC, or if you look back at the Reform Party, traditionally it takes 2 or 3 election cycles for a real presence to emerge in the House of Commons. Doing the math on that, that's probably anywhere between 6 and 15 years, depending on what happens. So my question would be, do we have that much time? Or is it possible that our only option is to reform the current parties because of how swiftly the global agenda on digital ID, digital money, digital carbon tracing, the ability to shut down a meeting like this with the click of a button? That would be my question. Do we have time to start from the ground? And if you think we do have time, could somebody speak to that? If you think we do have time, and why you think that's a gamble that we should take? Go ahead, Doctor.
There are many kinds of political offices where you have independent candidates, like school boards, city councils, and so on. I mean, I know there's been some attempts in major metropolitan area to have a slate of candidates, but in the normal course, these are opportunities. And the battle has to be first won to lay the groundwork with the troops on the ground, because the fight is in the schools. I've got 5 kids, and do you think any of them learned about the Charter of Rights in elementary school? No. When my kid goes to high school, he shows me pictures of the transgender flag. He shows me pictures of the pride colors. He shows me hearts that students are psychologically induced to create, so we love one another, supporting the pride movement. And this is all done by the school boards and passed on as orders to the school, because there's no point launching a new political party or reinventing an established party, which I don't think will work, until you lay the groundwork and educate a whole new generation. Because there is no point in having us basically say, okay, we're gonna accomplish our goal. The reality is, we need the time. We need the 5 to 15 years or whatever it is to lay the groundwork. Think of the Republican Party that was established around the late 1840s in the United States, and this was the party that abolished slavery. And you have to remember that Lincoln personally lost every single one of his 6 or so elections until he finally won one election and then was shot for it. So I'm telling you that you cannot take shortcuts when you are building. As Scripture tells us, you have to build on a foundation of rock, and you cannot be on slippery soil. If we try to move too fast, we're on, you know, we're in a faulty, earthquake, muddy area. There are no shortcuts to doing the hard work. I would love to see it happen. And it may not be done in my lifetime because I'm old like George here. But the point is this: my son Gabriel here can do it. And your daughters and your sons and your brothers and your sisters can do it. Because look at the cultures of other nations, the Asians, the Africans. These people are patient. They see the big picture and they don't give up. And that's what we have to do. We lost this country over 30 years and let it slip away. 15 years is half that time to build it back up. So let's be realistic.
Okay. So Dr. Anna first, then we'll go back to George. And I think are we at time, Jonathan? Give me a signal here. Yeah, are we good or at time? Oh, we're good. He says we're good. Okay, party all night. Let's go. Dr. Anna.
I'm going to turn it around a little bit here. I think we have good people, but we're not supporting them. So if you look at this point in time, if you vote against your government, federal government, for a money bill, you get kicked out of caucus. How many people were working for you that did not get reelected? The few honest politicians that actually took the chance and told the truth did not have the population standing behind them. So we can vet as much as we want, but once elected, a lot of them change. We've seen that. So vetting only works so far. If we know somebody's in the system and is working well, and we're not supporting them, and I'm going to add to this 2 stories quickly, okay? So first story is I'm going to mention my dad, Alex Kindy, okay? He came from Stalin, Ukraine, was a physician, became a member of parliament for 8 years, and he actually voted as his constituency asked. He's one of those super honest guys. The media hated him. He used to talk to us about growing up about the Federal Reserve. Everybody talked to him about like how he had a aluminum hat, the whole bit, right? So he actually polled his constituents, voted according to what they wanted, and he got kicked out of caucus by Mulroney, and then ran as an independent. And when he ran as an independent in Calgary East, he came in dead last, behind every single party. Behind every single party. Okay, so who was at fault here? Okay, so we know the Derek Sloans, we know the people now that are in the system that did not get reelected, and whose fault is that? Number 2, okay, the physicians that are standing up for you right now, okay, they're far in between, I have to say, okay, and part of the reason for that is I just got my letter 3 weeks ago, okay, my letter from the college about spreading misinformation. Okay, in that letter it states that I should not talk to you about this, but I am, because that's how I deal with bullies. I make it public.
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Kindy. I think they keep pulling me down because of the feedback. Thank you, Dr. Kindy. Go ahead, George.
Dr. Kindy, what can I say? Premier Peckford mentioned a word earlier today. He actually used two words. One describes 10 premiers and one prime minister right now, and that's called cowards. Dr. Kendi represents the other word that Premier Peckford used earlier today, and that's called courage. It's going to take courage. It's going to take faith in God. And always, anybody who's old enough, I'm an old man, and I remember 1985. I watched politics all my life, and I've had the privilege of calling General Edwin Meese a friend. He and Ursula have become friends of mine and Julie's over the last years. And he told me about being in Reykjavik, Iceland, in 1985 with that B-rated movie star, Ronald Reagan. What did he know? And he walked away from that as failure that day. No, it wasn't. The media would tell you that. It wasn't failure when he walked away from Mikhail Gorbachev. And look this up. Look up Time magazine, December 1988. And there's a picture in Time magazine 4 years later, this same Mikhail Gorbachev. He's standing between President Reagan and Vice President Bush in the Statue of Liberty. And the heading underneath said, from Mikhail Gorbachev, "The only thing I see different between my country and the USA is they've got God on their side." And Ed told me one time in Reykjavik, after the formal meeting was over, you know what Ronald Reagan said to Mikhail Gorbachev through the translators? You mentioned Ukraine. That B-rated movie star was not so dumb after all. He did his homework, just like my wonderful friend, Premier Peckford. He said, "Mikhail, I understand your mother came from Ukraine and she was a Christian. She believed in God." And that broke Mikhail Gorbachev's heart that day. And he came to love Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher and Pope John Paul, with the help of God, whoever would have thought in 1985 with that failed, the media said it was failed, talks in Reykjavik, Iceland, would result in 4 years later the end of the Soviet Union tyranny. That's what happened. We've got a tyranny now, and what will it take? With all of us in the room and millions across the country, it'll be all for naught. But if we look up these three passages, we have hope. God plus one is a majority. And I tell you something, in closing, in the last 2 years, by the grace of God, he took this former old wretch and he's transformed my life. And he's given me hope in his word. And I said to God back on the 23rd of February, the day they dropped those emergency mandates, I said, "What are we going to do, Lord?" And he said, "Just look up Psalm 46:10. I got you guys covered up in Canada. Be still, George, and know that I am God. I will be exalted in the nation of Canada. I will be exalted in the world." And Julie and I were down west of Chicago back when our children were little. And we pulled into the birthplace of Ronald Reagan, this little town. We were up on the second floor. You might know I love Ronald Reagan. And under the glass in that apartment where he spent his first 3 years of life were a few older ladies. They were in their 60s. My God, they were old. And they said, "Look under the glass. Look at Ronald Reagan's mom's verse under that glass," which he, by the way, that very Bible, he returned it to that store after that place after his presidency. He swore on that, and this was his theme in 1982, January. 2 Chronicles 7:14. And you know, they say the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. For all of you moms out there rocking that cradle like my beautiful wife, raise them to fear God and know His Word, and this is what can happen in these next 4 years, just like the Soviet Union, just like they did for Ronald Reagan, at a time to choose. If my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves. I sure as hell had to humble myself. I can't do anything, but I can do all things through Christ. Shall humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways. 3 things Jesus will do. He'll hear from heaven, He will forgive our sins, and He will heal our land. That's what's going to get us victory.
Okay.
And that's under the supremacy of God that this man fought for.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bears. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to throw to Dr. Jeremy and Dr. Eric to see if you guys have any final words. If you could just keep it to just a minute or 2 max, if you have something you'd like to add in. Go ahead. So, Dr. Jeremy.
Just to say, this is not a particularly compelling tyranny that we're living under. It is tyranny, but most people don't believe in it. Most people are voting for the lesser of evils. Most people don't feel any confidence when they go into that voting booth. And so what are we really up against here? There's an opportunity. There's, as Fétine mentioned in her presentation, there's sometimes a very small percentage that are making this decision. And when people aren't compelled by the alternative, it's just a question of providing them with an alternative. It's a question of holding that middle. It doesn't mean forming a government right out of the gate at the next election. It means having enough independent and conscientious people in there who will tip the balance when our freedoms are at stake, when the character of our nation is at stake. And I think there is a potential for that. Start with small steps. Time will bring around the kind of peaceful revolution and free society that we all hope for.
Amazing. Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Jeremy. Dr. Eric, did you have anything you wanted to bring to the conversation at this point?
Well, I certainly agree with everything I heard, and I remain hopeful that the Lord will come and save us. I think He helped bring the truckers along, so maybe we have some support there. I also like the idea of building a new party and taking time to do it properly. But I think the reality is, by the fall, we're going to be seeing another series of lockdowns and masks and vaccines, and you just have to listen to them. They're already planning this. They're telling us it's coming. And so, by the fall, we're going to have to, be in a situation where we're going to resist what they say. And I think, strength is in numbers. And right now, the problem gets back to the media, gets back to the propaganda, the messaging. Because they control that, there's a lot of people who are still living in fear and not willing to sort of see what's in front of their nose. And somehow the egregiousness of what we've watched over the last 6 months, has to come to the front somehow. But there has to be, a realization that we're battling back in the next few months as we, build things in the background. But I think, we don't have 15 years to get a new party in place and take over ownership. I mean, my hope is that if somebody comes into Alberta, somebody new, all it would take is one person in a leadership role like that to all of a sudden look at the people making the healthcare decisions in the province, do a proper autopsy on who knew what when, and take over ownership of that. And I think that could domino effect in different provinces in this country. But that would be one way to sort of get that happening more quickly. I don't know if there's anybody in waiting in the wings to do that. My hope for a long time was that Kenny would be able to do that, because I think he, despite the fact that he had one of the lowest approval ratings of all, whatever, if he had stood up for freedom, if he had stood up for the truth on this one, people would have rallied behind him. And we just need somebody who's willing to do that, and we need to support that person when they do.
Wow, good word. Good word. So unfortunately for us, I think we are more than at time tonight. We want to, like I said, give you guys a chance to get refreshed. I want to end or cinch this with 2 thoughts. This was going through my head over the last about 10 minutes here. I had a mentor that said to me once that very few people have the intellectual breadth to hear in stereo. usually people pick a perspective, pick a lane, and lock and load, and everything else is just wrong. And I think what we've heard tonight is actually a lot of in stereo wisdom. And I wonder, I just want to kind of lay this out as we consider these things before we go to bed tonight. I wonder if this is one of those both and situations where, we continue to bring our civic authority, our civic equity into the nominations at the early stage. We make sure that when good people are sticking their necks out, that we're there to back them up. I think I heard somebody today talk about buying a conservative membership and voting in the upcoming conservative leadership race, bringing our equity into the table. James chapter 4, if I could cinch for the Bible verse as well, has really been hitting my heart recently, because it talks about how when we have the power to do good, and we don't use that power, that the Bible actually calls that sin. And I think in Canada, we've been given this democratic trust. And it just may be that we find ourselves in a moment where we have an opportunity to hear in stereo, to make sure we're making the most of every opportunity that's right in front of us, backing up the good men and women who are sticking their necks out, like Roman Baber up there today and others that have paid a price, making sure that we're using the equity and the influence that's in our hands right now, but also making sure that we're committing to lock and load for the long haul, that we're strategizing, that we're having those convocations, and that we're patient with the process of nation building, just as our founding fathers were very patient and sacrificial in the process of nation building. So that's what I'm taking away from this panel tonight. A lot of wisdom for today and also for the next 15 to 30 years, should the Lord tarry. But that's the big question. So should we end with that? When is Jesus coming back? The Honorable Brian Peckford? We need to know how much time we have. Just kidding. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for your amazing engagement throughout this day. Thank you so much. Give it up for our panelists. Yeah. Thank you, Jonathan.